Hello. I actually have a question for Nick, and thank you for joining us, Secretary Shulkin. He came in under your leadership. And so I'd like to know for Nick, what has changed since you came in, the most notable things that have changed for you in the VA? For Dr. Shulkin, I have read your book now twice. Just, and one of my favorite things about it is the title. It shouldn't be this hard to serve your country. And I think it expresses a frustration that a lot of us feel, particularly those. Now, I'm on the outside, I'm not a VA employee. And so being on the outside, watching what happens with government systems and that frustration of not knowing how to work with them or in them or outside of them. And one of the stories that you have in the book that I thought was really interesting that I'd like you to expand on is you mentioned that you were emergency response for the nightclub shooting in Orlando, and that you said, we've got the resources here, whether it be mental health or physical health, to respond on site to that particular situation. But then came well, you can't because that's not the lane you're supposed to be in, which is, of course, a reflection of government systems and that. Would you expand on what that was like for you and what happened? And just tell whatever of that story you'd like to, but I think it's a very interesting story for our members to hear. Thank you for that. That's what I find really interesting about the story is the knowledge that it is so much farther than just what happens in the walls of the VA, that you are prepared for so many other things and yet aren't necessarily utilized for that, meaning the VA, but also the leadership aspect of this, the being willing to put your neck out there and do things that are really for the best interest of whether it be veterans or citizens at large, just the American public. And so I was grateful for that story because I think it exemplifies both courage and leadership, but also just a good anecdote about how these systems work and when the lawyers get involved. And of course, that happens in community care as well.
I wanted to segue to another topic on trainees. I see medical students, residents rotating on service, and they really enjoy it. And they often say, I would love to work at the VA. I'm wondering how you think we can continue to attract the best and brightest to the VA healthcare system.
Prior to recording, you and I were discussing clinical trials, and AVAHO has, for a long time, tried to get its hands around how to best help facilitate the trial process. And of course, there's a lot there between industry, between the VA and the veterans that would be applicable to a clinical trial, plus what's available in community care. I guess my overall question is, what would you like to see happen for the veterans in terms of better access to clinical trials? That's a great segue, actually, to one of the questions that I was most hoping you would answer today, and that is, you're speaking about the outcomes. I have witnessed it personally with family members, but also in my professional role from an eagle eye view, of different VAs all over the country and the success that they have in their outcomes. And it is such an underreported success story. And so my question for you is, what do you want people to know about the VA and what's different and special about it aside from community care? Like I said, that's a personal passion of mine is telling the story of why the VA is unique, and I love the comparison to things that aren't necessary within the VA, but some of those things that are. You mentioned the burn pits and the exposure. We have over 300,000 more cases of cancer now because of their exposure rate, and that is something incredibly unique in community care. These physicians sometimes don't think to ask. And so they're almost misdiagnosing, or at least diagnosing cancers that they don't know the source of and why. And so I fear that we would be losing some quality of care if they are outside of the system completely. That is a great way to end. Be a force multiplier for your impact. So, Secretary David Shulkin, we really appreciate your time. We appreciate your efforts on the job and since. And personally, I appreciate your continued advocacy for veterans. Thank you so much for your time and for your efforts.